Are you a choice neglector or choice acceptor? I've come to realize that sometimes we're not as responsible as we could be with our choices. We neglect our choices. Now, I realize we live in trying times. People in our world are mean, nasty. Not to say that we don't have good people. We have a mix of people, and we have situations in society that shrink our control or cause us to believe we don't have any control. What I think happens is people focus on all the things they don't have control over, and they put all their energy there. And when they do that, it's like a sinkhole of depression and anxiety that drags you down, and it's not productive. So what I suggest is, in any given situation, ask yourself, where are my choices? And then once you figure out what your choices are, exercise your right to choose. Now, you might not have a lot of choices. It would be nice if we always had 100 choices about any given situation, but sometimes you only got one choice. If you use that choice wisely, though, it will likely lead to other choices. Your choices will multiply. Let me give you a story that illustrates this. So, if you've heard of the story of Joseph, and if you haven't, I'll just break it down for you really quick. Joseph was highly favored by God. He was also highly favored by his father. Now, being favored like that caused some jealousy from his siblings. But also, Joseph was a bit of a dreamer, and he shared some of his dreams with his brothers. And one of those dreams basically foretold the future of him ruling over the nation and therefore ruling over them. And they were like most people are, or not most people, but some people are when they hear about your greatness. Even if they smile, they're kind of like jealous or bitter, and some of that bitterness is not about you, it's mostly about them, because the idea is, if you're successful, you're just making me think about how unsuccessful I am. You're strong makes me feel like I'm weak. And because of that, they decided in their heart they wanted to kill Joseph. Luckily, one of Joseph's brothers favored Joseph and talked his brothers out of killing him and said, let's just put him in a pit. Joseph eventually was sold into slavery. Think about that for a second. Not just the trauma of being sold into slavery, being free and not having to be captive, but he's sold into slavery in a different country, which means that he didn't understand the language of people and how they're talking. He went by himself. He was sold into slavery by his brothers that are supposed to love and care for him. I mean, just imagine how traumatic that would be. Despite all of that, when he was a slave, Joseph made some decisions that helped him prosper. The Bible says after a time he was responsible for Potiphar's estate, and that Potiphar's estate was prosperous. Certainly this has to do with the favor of God. In addition to that, though, his choices. I imagine Joseph must have had small tasks before he had larger tasks, and he had to be consistent with those tasks for Potiphar to realize that, hey, he does have the favor. He's doing well with this task, and his mind had to be focused on just that choice. Even though he probably was depressed sometimes, he had to focus on the choices in front of him. And what that led to was more choices in his situation. He became head of the estate, which I imagine had a lot more benefits than just being the ordinary slave. Now, as he started to prosper, he had a setback. Caught the eye of Potiphar's wife, and she lied on him because he wouldn't respond to her seductive methods. And she lied on him to Potiphar, and he ended up being put in prison. So now he goes from being finally working himself up to a better spot and getting knocked down to a prison. What does he do then? Again, he uses his choices. He's responsible with tasks he's given, and he ultimately becomes the head of the prison, responsible for all logistics. Eventually, he becomes the second person in charge of the nation when Egypt was in a time of trouble, about to go through a drought and needing to prepare for it. If Joseph hadn't been wise with the choices he had, if he hadn't focused on the choices in front of him instead of all of the circumstances around him that he couldn't control, then he wouldn't have been able to get himself prepared to help a nation, to help a generation, ultimately to help his family also. So I know you might be going through some struggles. You might be upset about all the choices you don't have right now. My question for you, fam, is, are you looking at the choices that you do have, What are you doing with those? Because I'm going to tell you what I think. I think if you're responsible with one choice will become 2 choices, 2 will become 4, 4 will become 8, 8 will become 16, 16 will become 32. You will multiply. Your choices will multiply. And when your choices multiply, that's multiplication for your generation, for your family. So be a choice acceptor, not a choice neglector. Life is not what happens to you, it's how you respond. Be responsible. You are able to respond to whatever circumstance happens to you.